Hello, everyone. First, I wanted to congratulate the organizers. They've been doing an amazing job. Thank you. And it's has been very well organized. So I started at Klick Health about 7 years ago. And when I started, we were no more than 500 people. We're now about 1,700 people. And so you can imagine the company going from that type of smaller structure to like this way bigger structure. And through these structural changes, what has happened is Klick has evolved and changed constantly. Klick is a healthcare marketing and operationalization partner for a lot of our customers around the globe. It's been an Agency of the Year for quite a few years in a row, and it's the world's largest independent healthcare agency, yet structured to be nimble and flexible as well. Many of you have gone through changes in the organization and different ways to organize the teams and the groups. And these usually range from craft-centric to offering-centric, right? So the way we break our teams depends on what kind of vicinity do we want to the different crafts or the different groups. We'll talk a little bit about this and how what it means for the different teams. According to the 2022 Gartner report, intelligent, composable business will be the most important factor for growth of companies in the next 3 years. Companies will outpace the competition by about 80% by just the ability to be composable. And what composability means in terms of organizations is it means that different teams can break down, regroup, and be restructured depending on the business needs. So clearly this is quite important. What does this mean? What does composable business mean? And in fact, the Gartner report doesn't really clarify this. It just goes through the ability for these groups to be reorganized and be modular. But to find those answers, we actually look at a branch of math called category theory. And in category theory, the whole purpose of it is to define the right structures for groups and businesses to be composable. So it deals with composability. And composability is a means of abstraction and sameness, and it basically allows us to look at the context without the details, hide the unnecessary details, keep the context that really matters. This is also important because everything in life is built in such a way. Modules, atoms, everything is composable and decomposable. And billions of years of trial and error are obviously show us the way to build things. So category theory is that simple, very, very simple, at the essence of it, at the foundations. And it starts with the essence of a category, which is basically objects and arrows. And the objects don't really even matter. The arrows are the things that need to compose. So if you think of these arrows as morphisms, as something abstract that has some properties, then we think of category theory as and categories as the ability to compose these things. In programming, for example, we think of data types and functions, right? Data types we don't need the details, we don't need to know what they really are, but the functions, what we need to know about them is we need to know how do they compose, right? So the most important part of a category is composition of arrows. So what does it even mean? It means that if there's an arrow from A to B and an arrow from B to C, there's an arrow from A to C that is called G of H. So if the first arrow is H and the first arrow is G, there's an arrow from A to C, G of H, that has the same properties as the two arrows combined. Okay? Two examples. In programming, this would be the composable functions. You don't need to know the parameters. You don't need to know what they do. You put them together, and they create a new function, and then that's all you need to remember. In life, in our day-to-day, an example of this is the way we abstract family. If A is the mother of B and B is the mother of C, then we already do this for thousands of years. A is the grandmother of C. Same thing if A is the sister of B and B is the mother of C, A is the aunt of C, right? So we don't talk about mother of mother anymore. We talk about, here's my grandmother, right? It makes things simpler. It allows us to not know the details of which mother. We just talk about the grandmother. There's two laws now. Now that we know categories about arrows and composability of the arrows, there's two main laws that need to be preserved. The first one is associativity of the composition, right? This is the exact same thing as in math, what we've learned in elementary school. A plus B plus C equals A plus B plus C, right? What it means is the order of operations, not the order of the elements, the order of operations doesn't matter. In real life, we see this as if A is the mother of B, B is the mother of C, and C is the mother of D. It doesn't matter which way you go about which one is the grandmother. It's still A is the great-grandmother of D, right? So associativity, pretty straightforward. And finally, and we deal with this a lot in math, the identity arrow, which means that every object has an arrow to itself. In programming, this is just the identity function, right? Every function that brings past the parameter gives you back the function, the parameter back. Why do we need identity in general? Well, because we can actually build our mathematical constructs very easily. For example, why do we need 0? Every number that adds to 0, that is added by 0 is still the same number. Every number that is multiplied by 1 is still the same number. We need this so that we can actually do algebra. So we're armed with this pretty straightforward way of thinking of a category. What we can do now is think of how can we compose? Why does this even help us? In mathematics and in category theory, what we actually do is we don't just look at the simplicity of a category because we don't deal only with simplistic data structures. We actually deal with pretty complex, organized structures and parts and pieces. But this is not dissimilar from how organizations evolve, right? We started at 20 people in a startup, and then we grow to thousands and hundreds of thousands, right? So the ability to compose, recompose, and then abstract the composition itself is going to be very important at those levels. But again, let's continue with our simplicity. So in the screen, you're looking at the original Lego patent. According to Times Magazine, Lego is the most influential toy of all time. It has, I don't think a lot of us will disagree, it has survived through the years. It has been played from almost everyone that kind of knows the structures, and it's one of those patents that has lived in history. It's super simple, and it also forms a category. So interestingly enough, the Lego patent, right in the patent, we see a category. And that's actually the reason why the same interface survives through the different modulations of it. So the first thing is it forms a category right into the way Legos lock, right? It has a clear arrow interface, and the ability to compose arrows is quite simple. Two Lego blocks that compose together, and then two Lego blocks that compose together, they can all put together, right? And then the same thing, those blocks of blocks can be put together with other blocks. It's called the genius of Lego, right? Because it literally forms the category right into the way it works, right into the mechanism, into the pattern. Does it preserve associativity? Well, yes. So it doesn't matter which one started first or which groups of blocks started first or next, or whatever the order was of operations, you can still put them together very easily. Does it hold identity? Well, yes, because a single Lego block composed with itself is still the same Lego block, right? It has an identity function as well. So what happens with Legos and why it's been so influential is because of the foundations and the simplicity of its own design, there is this idea of non-trivial modularity that happens across the board. So we're starting to build, you'll see like alien ships, like big alien ships with like thousands of components built from like these simple foundational Lego blocks. And you'll see this non-trivial modularity, which is things you never thought about, like little Lego people that compose through the whole ecosystem, or like little Lego buses or trucks or whatever, and they also compose through the ecosystem. So it continues, the composition continues at like these much more complex structures naturally. So, and that's why it's the genius of Lego. And again, it forms a category. Okay, so let's get back to what we care about. What does it mean to create composable business? If it's going to be so influential, and if the Gartner report makes it so important, what is it about it, right? In any business that we run, the function, if you think of the things that could be the arrow, are really two things, right? Communication flow and flow of artifacts. And what that means is the way we communicate, our meetings, our Slacks, our Zooms, etc. That's communication flow, right? It's so important that Amazon dealt with this in many different ways to reduce complexity of communication and to actually reduce communication itself, unneeded, unnecessary communication. And the second thing is flow of artifacts. It could be digital, it could be physical, doesn't matter. Flow of artifacts means these things that we exchange in our day-to-day work. So if we think of our arrows as being these two things, then we'll look at the complexities of each. So how many lines of communication are there between two team members? If you have two team members, how many lines of communication are there? That's right, one line of communication. How many lines between three team members? Well, 3, right? 4, 6. So we're already seeing there's a non-linear way to the growth of communication, right? Even if it might not be exponential, it grows in an exponential way. So as we're getting to many people, and this is, for example, for a normal company, even a normal startup, at 11, 12 people, small startup, it's still already, lines of communication are getting unwieldy. It's impossible to communicate this way, right? So what do? We already do this in a way. We start breaking teams into these smaller groups that communicate together, and then the groups within each other form their own lines of communication, right? That's what we kind of do naturally now. And from experience, we know this works. So if we go to the earlier example of how we break our teams, and we think of communication flow and flow of artifacts, then we can look at the different examples of how do these compose? How can we break down these more complex structures, right? So if our initial structure was, let's say, craft-centric, right? We're centralized teams divided by craft. And if these teams are small, then, well, they naturally compose, because what happens is, depending on how your dependencies work, the one group can create something basically as those functions of communication and artifacts, and then the second group has those functions of communication and artifacts, and we can put those together without any complexity in between, right? So that's why smaller teams are generally more nimble. They work naturally, right? You don't need a lot of thinking about how the work is organized. They almost self-organize in a way, right? As the teams get bigger, however, you don't just have the groups, the crafts, right? You don't just have those composing within each other. You actually have within themselves as well, because they're naturally broken within the groups, right? So let's say if your development craft had 30 people, well, these 30 people, if they have so many lines of communications and so many exchanges of artifacts, this doesn't compose anymore. So they need to break down, right? So I will give an example of a way to a clear use case of something that doesn't compose initially, and what do we need to do to make it compose? And remember, the one thing that we want to remember is, how does it form a category, right? So how does it abide to the rules of the category? So the simplest example is creation of design assets, right? So we have your design team creating design assets which are needed for your development team, right? So the ability to create design assets, which is communication, which also needs communication between the design team and the dev team, this is the function, right? It's communication between the teams, it's artifacts between the teams as well. And then second is creation of coding assets, right? So communication between dev and QA, let's say, is the generation of these artifacts. Do these compose? Well, potentially, right? If the process is in such a way that it's not really waterfall, then, or even if it is waterfall, you can still put these two parts together and go literally from A to C. You can, in a way, go from design to QA without really knowing the details in between, what happens with the teams in between, right? But however, they are not associative. So what that means is, especially in a waterfall way, you're waiting for your design components before you get to your development components, right? You can't really build without your designs, right? Your Photoshop files or sketch files, etc. So this is not really composable. At larger teams, this is now, we don't have these abilities to create a category and start almost like self-composition of the teams themselves. So one of the things we've done in the past is, well, we created a design system. So now what we're doing is, by thinking of the design system, and this is the reason why design system also became such big hype, is because without even thinking about it, unconsciously, what we're really doing is we're working from the same premises, meaning we can now abide the laws of associativity. We are able to create our design components and create our development components from almost like pre-decided parts, pre-decided ideas. And so by doing that, we have no dependencies between each other. So putting those together in the end just means connecting them, right? So you not only have the compositivity of arrows, you also have associativity between them. Does an identity hold? Naturally, right? Every person or every artifact itself can compose to itself, right? There's always an arrow. You can communicate to yourself in a way. You can send your artifacts to yourself through Drive or whatever. So the moment that the category holds, this becomes a powerful way of making sure that not only do these artifacts compose, but also your standards down the road, right? So their teams can grow bigger. They can scale very, very highly without really having any concerns about the categories holding. As these get bigger, what happens is you can now apply much higher levels of abstraction for whoever wants to seeing the organization at a much higher level as well, right? So not only your design and dev teams and your PM and your strategy or marketing teams or whatever, you're looking at all of these in the same fashion. You're saying there's no dependencies between teams, things can compose, these teams can grow really big and still preserve those foundations. The exact same thing happens if we group by offering instead of craft, right? So if we group by offering, the same idea. We need to see where are our dependencies, how do we make sure the category holds, and how do we make sure that those teams are also composable, right? Because as these teams grow, it doesn't matter anymore what the structure you pick. You can literally pick any of these structures, including hybrid, and still have the same problems or opportunities that arise by the ability to compose. And as the company is getting, and the organizations are getting bigger, what we're also preserving is the ability for everyone in the groups to understand their part and the hidden detail or the unnecessary details so that they also think in terms of composition as well. Thank you. We're going to do questions.
Thank you, Kreshnik. Let me just grab that from me.
Yes, please.
Okay, well, that was in depth for sure. Right, any questions from the floor? If anyone has any questions, you put your hand up. Okay, I can't see any at the moment. I've had some virtual questions come through for you, Kreshnik.
Yep.
One question was, can this theory or whatever, can this be applied to all industries, or are some industries that this suits better?
Great question, because this naturally communication and artifacts flow are literally any industry. Manufacturing, marketing, product development, anything, it's literally about those two things, which means once we have those functions, and we're thinking in terms of those functions, the details don't matter anymore. We just need to think of, does it form a category? How can we remove the dependencies? How do these compose together?
So for instance, for a media company like ours, creative industry, this could be applied to that?
Absolutely. In the media industry, communication is obviously very important. The artifacts you guys create are the magazines, right? Like this conference itself is part of those artifacts, right? Making sure the stage is correct, etc. Right? So the exact same thing. How do these building your assets? How does it work? Is it composable? What Scott is creating, can someone else create? Right? The exact same way.
Okay, and just remind us about Klick Health as well. What is it that you guys do? And if people want to know more information, how can they get through to you?
Thank you. So Klick Health is Klick with a K is easy to find. We are an operationalization partner for healthcare and pharmaceutical companies in mainly the United States, but also in the world. We are, like I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest independent healthcare agencies. And some of the things we do is we help patients and doctors find more information about the products, create and help with the products, and also beyond just pharmaceuticals, we're getting into what is it in healthcare that is missing. So we're getting now into the areas, and we have few branches of Klick that are looking into information flow in healthcare, EHR systems in the United States and Canada that need a lot of work, health as a lifestyle as well, and etc.
Okay. All right, great. Yes, I have a question there. Could we get the microphone over there? If you just please start by stating your name and where you're from, please.
My name is Arun Kumar. I'm from Stepstone Group. And my question right now is whether you go for the last few years of the pandemic period, then we came to know about working on with the remote working and everything. For me, so how I see things is currently we got a problem right now is okay, so most of them we move into the cloud, and then we can able to see technology, how to work kind of area. The problem right now is when you go for the different working with the different across the whole global needs. If you work in different countries, the culture and kind of that's taking more time with respect to the communication. That's the one technology-wise development work. Everything's common. That's not a bigger headache right now. Is more taking time is a communication, meetings, taking a decision over there. So from your perspective, how can we minimize so that we can able to get the things moving?
Yeah, perfect. So great question. So the details, the unnecessary details is what is going to be the number one thing for us to remove out of the, as we're getting from the offices to online, and as the work is becoming remote, obviously removing these unnecessary details brings all the right metrics to the surface, right? So that becomes even more important. So thinking about how do my teams compose, how do my even environments, the ways I'm working, how do those remove dependencies, my tools, my platforms. If those compose, and if the ways we work compose, and again, if communication flow and artifacts flow composes, then it's much easier for us to think of what are the next tools, what are the next platforms, what is not working and what is working, right? So it almost helps you with the changes and the way you're changing, the evolutionary stages of the company.
Okay, thank you for your question, and thank you, Kreshnik.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you.